month. But my doctor friends are unanimous in reporting to me that no one can exist on only one meal every 30 days, and that is all the 1,000 francs would buy today, and that would be a meal about 1/3 the value that any of us would buy were we in France at this time. If you would like to test the validity of this line of reasoning historically, let me call your attention to several simple facts. As short a time as 1929, the take of the people's earned income by the government in Russia was 29%, not 35% where we are today. The take of the people's earned income at that time by the government in Germany was 22%, and in France and in England at that time it was 21%, not 35% where we now are. You know, there are two types of inflation, that is in popular terms. One is called creeping inflation and the other is called galloping inflation. Creeping inflation is supposed to be the type that we are now experiencing. I think the term is not quite lusty enough to describe a dollar that has lost somewhere between 52 and 63% of its purchasing value since 1939. Galloping inflation is the type that went on in Germany during the years after World War I, in France after the Revolutionary period, in China recently, and in the Latin American countries today. Here is an example of what I mean. I have before me the currency of Bolivia. This little piece of paper is 10,000 Bolivianas. In 1935, it was worth 4,600 present-day American dollars. Do you know what it's worth today? It is worth exactly 80 cents. That's what you call galloping inflation. And it was all brought about, they didn't have any wars, by governmental interventionism. Now then, what I want to suggest is that inflation in this country has ever so many more catastrophic potentials than has ever been the case in any other country in history. We are the most advanced division of labor society that has ever existed. That is, we are more specialized than any other people has ever been. We are further removed from self-subsistence. Indeed, we are so specialized today that every one of us in this nation, even the farmers, is absolutely dependent upon a free, uninhibited exchange of our numerous specializations. This is a self-evident fact. In any highly specialized economy, you do not effect specialized exchanges by barter. You never observe a person going into a gasoline station and saying, "Here is a goose, give me a gallon of gas." That's not the way to do it in a specialized economy. We have to use an economic circulatory system, which is money, the medium of exchange. This economic circulatory system, in some respects, can be likened to the circulatory system of the body, which is the bloodstream. The circulatory system of the body picks up oxygen in the lungs and ingested food in the midsection and distributes these specialties to the 30 trillion cells of the body. At those points, it picks up carbon dioxide and waste matter and carries them off. I could put a hypodermic needle into one of your veins and thin your bloodstream to the point where it would no longer make these exchanges. And when I reached that point, we could refer to you quite accurately in the past tense. By the same token, we can thin our economic circulatory system, our medium of exchange, to the point where it will no longer circularize the products and services of economic specialization. When this happens, the economy of our nation will be ruined. Let me show you how it works. Right after the armistice, my squadron was sent to Koblenz with the Army of Occupation. The German inflation was underway, and I enjoyed what I experienced then. Namely, I received more marks each payday than I received the previous payday, and it was not because my salary was raised. It was because the inflation was underway. And after I left, this inflation kept right on going until the year 1923. It got to the point where 30 million marks would not buy a single loaf of bread. About the time I was there was an old German who passed away, and he left his fortune to his two sons, 500,000 marks each. One of the sons was a frugal lad. He never spent a pfennig of it. The other was a bit of a wastrel. He spent it all on champagne parties. When the day came in 1923 that 30 million marks would not buy a single loaf of bread, the lad who had saved everything had nothing. But the one who had spent his money on champagne parties was able to exchange the empty bottles for a dinner. You see, the economy had been reduced to barter.
Mr. Read, has there ever been an instance historically when a country on this type of toboggan succeeded in reversing itself?
There have been some minor instances. I will not attempt to enumerate them. The only significant one that I know about took place in England after the Napoleonic Wars. England's debt in relation to her resources was larger than ours is now. Her taxation was confiscatory. Restrictions on the exchanges of goods and services were numerous, and there were strong controls on production and prices. Had it not been for the smugglers, many people would have starved. Now something happened in that situation, and we ought to take cognizance of it. What happened there might be emulated here, even though our problem is on a much larger scale. There were in England such men as John Bright and Richard Cobden, men who understood the principles of freedom of exchange. In France, there was a politician by the name of Chevalier and an economist named Frederick Bastiat. Incidentally, if any of you have not read the little book by Bastiat entitled The Law, I commend it as the finest thing that I have ever read on the principles one ought to keep in mind when trying to judge for oneself what the scope of government should be. Bastiat was feeding his brilliant ideas to Cobden and Bright, and these men were preaching the merits of freedom of exchange. Members of Parliament listened, and as a result there began the greatest reform movement in all of British history. It was made up of the repeal of restrictive law. They repealed the Corn Laws, which here would be somewhat like repealing subsidies to farmers. And they repealed the Poor Laws, which here would be something like repealing compulsory Social Security. There were other repeals. And, fortunately for Western civilization, England at the time had a monarch, her name was Victoria, who appeared to have no passion for ruling Englishmen in an overriding sense. She relaxed that authority which they themselves believed to be implicit in her office. She gave them freedom in the sense that a prisoner on parole has freedom. They can be yanked back, but Queen Victoria did not yank them back. They roamed all over the world and built empire, a development that went on until just before World War I, when the same old disease set in again.